Hi everyone. It's nice to be in a room full of people and lovely people like you. So yes, I am Daryl, and that is what you're about to sit through. So I will, before I get into it, so I will get the two big elephants out of the room. Yes, I am wearing a happy t-shirt. That is going on, right? And I also know, as the title of a session goes, that is quite a bold title. Right, you shove the word brilliant in anything and it gets people backs up. So I sort of been doing this sort of 11 years, sort of banging on about the well-being thing for 11 years now. And so, prior to COVID, this would be my normal job, traveling around the country, meeting lovely people like you in a room. So even in inverted commas, normal times, coming to sort of deliver a training session called The Art of Being Brilliant felt like a bit of a stretch for a lot of people. So I'm always used to send lots of sceptical people to start my sessions. But I sort of feel in the last 2.5 years, people being dragged kicking and screaming to this session, albeit virtually in the middle of a pandemic, feels like someone somewhere's taking the mickey. I promise I'm not taking the mickey. I would argue this stuff is more important now than it was 2, 3, 5, 10 years ago. And it was really important 2, 3, 5, 10 years ago. So first things first, we'll have a bit of play with our brains. See who the clever ones are in the room. On the next slide, see if you can see a horse. There's a purpose to this, I promise. So see if you can see a horse. Oh, yeah. I'm hoping you got a frog. That's good news. Else it's going to say if you start a few of you doing it, if you just turn your head to the right, that sometimes helps.
Oh yeah.
Frog is on.
The horse and a frog sitting on top of the leaf.
So there's always 3 faces at this point that I do. Those of you who have got it, you're sat there now, either feeling very smug with yourself, or starting to get annoyed with the person next to you. Those of you who can't, we've already given up on this session. So if you don't worry about it. This isn't a brilliance test and you fail. So that's still a little icebreaker, but there's a sort of serious point behind it. So that is the frog, that is the horse. So not the best looking horse in the world, but nevertheless, that is an illustration of the horse's head. So if you flip it back round, you've got you've got the ears there. You've got the nostril and mouth top left, you've got the mane at the bottom of your brain. So the point behind it is this, that for most people, to give ourselves a fighting chance of seeing what we want to see, we sort of need to look at that screen from a bit of a different perspective. So normally for most people, sort of turning your head to the right helps us see what we want to see. And that's what the Art of Being Brilliant is about, really. So the Art of Being Brilliant isn't really about work. This is about us as individuals, because you know this, if you're getting you right, if you're helping yourself pitch in as the best version of you, even more than you lot already do, then guess what? Work benefits by default. All your colleagues do, the community certainly does. Arguably those, more importantly, arguably those, closest to us in the world benefit by default. So I'm hoping in this time we've got together, you might think about what this session means for you from a slightly different perspective than you normally bother to think about yourself. So sort of go through that. For the rest of this session, especially with the physios of you in the room. I'm no medical person, but that's not good for you if you're doing that for a period of time. So don't do it on the outside, but maybe on the inside. And we will get you to do some chats around some things. Some of the most simple thinking we can do, but in this crazy world that we live in, we don't seem to do it anymore. So, we'll keep it really interactive. And building up to the first bit of interaction, there's a reason why I do want to go back, right? But it's a really, really important reason why. Let's be honest. 2.5 years ago, the world threw us all a big, massive fire. And clearly, some people's holes were much deeper than others. But I was asked a question in April 2020, of which I know the answer to. But for the first time back then in 9 years, that question really stumped me. It was a guy called Patrick who works at Shropshire Council. And I was used to do some sessions with him and his team. And obviously, COVID hit, lockdown came, that first sort of whole thing of the rawness and apocalyptic sort of nature of everything that seems to be sort of going on. And so they all got cancelled, obviously. And eventually picked up the phone in April, just randomly, and he said, well, I'm just wondering if we can still try and do a few sessions now, but try some of this virtual stuff, try it on Teams or Zoom or something. And I just remember thinking, I am technically inept. Right? I've never done anything virtual in my life before, and I don't really want to start now. But I sort of said to him, well, I guess we could give it a go. We've got nothing to lose. He said, the only thing is, currently, right now, in this moment, in the rawness, the weirdness, and the scariness of everything, well, I like what you do. Is it okay to be happy? And I remember thinking, right, well, all my work has disappeared out of my diary, and I've got a mortgage to pay. My eldest lad was due to be doing his A-levels. That was all up in the air. More importantly, my mum and my sister live in my hometown of Swindon in Wiltshire, 100 miles away from where I live now. So, you know, and they both got chronic underlying health conditions. So they were both worried and shielding. So quite frankly, in that moment, I was not feeling particularly happy. But once you sort of step out of that, the actual answer to that question is, at any given time, in any given moment, in any given situation, yes, it's all right to be happy, right? Because happiness is an emotion, but we cannot choose our emotion. But what we can do is help our brains open up to experience different types of emotions than our brains would otherwise allow us to experience based on sort of how we're wired, which is what we're going to get into. So your brain is a wonderful piece of kit, but it's a bit of a slippery customer. And one of its biggest jobs every day, every second of every day, is to basically filter the world around you. So it's much more complicated than the computer version of one, but essentially your brain is a spam filter. And this picture sort of summarises it really. I mean, I'm in fairness, I mainly share this picture for that face there. I think that's just a great face though. But this picture is like a visual metaphor for our brain. And it taps into two principles that we're all aware of. There's that first saying that you get what you focus on. So it's fundamentally true. So the more we think a particular way over a period of time, the more our brain helps us provide evidence around us to prove our thinking is right, for better or worse. So, you know, and I know, you know, we create our own echo chamber, and I know social media is taking that to a whole other scary level now, but we've been doing this for thousands of years as human beings. And then by default, that feeds into the next saying that the same event happens to two people, but they seem to be describing two totally separate things. Well, they are, because everyone's got different spam settings and everyone's thinking a bit differently. And so if we analyse this picture, all these young people are at exactly the same event. Heaven knows what event it is. Right? They're all looking at exactly the same thing, but they're all seeing and hence emotionally experiencing something totally different. So you've got the one in the middle who's cheering on, you've got the lad in the flat cap who just seems to want it all to go away, and you've got a few who are actually screaming. So every single one of those young people will leave that event, they will go and talk about that event to someone, and there'll be 100 different stories about what happened. Right? So none of them are lying, it's just what their brains have allowed them to let in based on maybe what they were expecting, maybe what but certainly what they're thinking in that moment. So then we need to help adjust our spam settings. So, because unfortunately our spam settings, as we're going to explore, are a little bit off. So first little exercise for you, and the reason for sort of referring back over the last 2.5 years was because actually in March 2020, and clearly I know from a workplace perspective, your holes were much, you know, bigger than mine. But that was a massive cliff edge, right? For all of us collectively in terms of what we went through. But none of us wanted it. Of course we don't. I'm not belittling it, and I know it's not gone anywhere, and it's still here. Right? But here we are 2.5 years later. In those 2.5 years, especially compared to, you know, the early days of all of this sort of stuff, what are you most proud of about you through this period of time? Off you go, have a chat. I'm going to keep all the chats relatively short, but I'm going to try and throw as much stuff as I can at you for sort of thought for, because in terms of thinking, all this stuff isn't just to do with, you know, once with a weird local Daryl. So nothing changes. This is about us going away and thinking a bit differently. So the more stuff I can sort of throw at you, the better it is. And I, with a few of them, we'll get people to sort of shout out a few things. But with that one, I won't, only because typically sort of, you know, there's sort of personal sort of stories involved, and you know, sort of we've all been on sort of different sort of journeys. But I've been doing this exercise with people since January last year, and typically it would be sort of virtually. It's been really interesting to sort of see sort of stories that sort of come through on the chat. And I'm guessing, I know Darren Brown in terms of a mind reader, but whatever you talked about, I bet falls under an umbrella of whether you said it or not, or realised it or not, of how massively adaptable and resilient we are as human beings. Everything we did, even if you feel as though, you know, for people that sort of say to me, well, we've kept going, like, yeah, but in an environment that was just unprecedented. That is not keeping going. I think that is showing a level of resilience way beyond, right? Just to sustain, right, was massive. And I spend probably 70% of my time doing training sessions with wonderful people like you in the NHS and education. And I love spending my time with you lot because you lot are a totally different breed. I mean that, right? I really mean that. Because you're sort of used to change. You're used to the goalposts moving all of the time. And clearly, you know, that was just someone came on the pitch, moved the goalposts, right, and they were never coming back again, right? But actually, outside of health and education, whenever I do this exercise with people, people have been amazed about how resilient and adaptable they were, right? But they didn't have to do what you did, and I didn't have to do what you did. But they were in their world, and I was in my world, and we did what we did, right? But that's why, in some ways, you're sort of a victim of your own success in terms of how adaptable and how you deal with it compared to other people. So there's a thing in our brain called habituation. So when we're used to things being a particular way, they become less special. So if you're in an environment of which you are, of which there is continual change outside the pandemic, you just crack on. And that's great, right? But that's you showing resilience. The problem is you never remind yourself of that. You're just very good at doing. Right? And the problem is if we don't remind ourselves of how resilient we are or remember moments of how resilient we are, what happens and what tends to happen is when change comes again, psychologically, it feels like you're at the base camp of Everest and you've got to get to the summit. Whether that changes for better or worse is irrelevant, really, because this is about you dealing with it, right? If it's coming, it's coming. But actually, psychologically, you're not at base camp. You were when you were born, but all through our lives, we've adapted and changed the world around us. The problem is we never stop. We just keep going on the treadmill and going and going and going and going and going. You know, you're already somewhere up the mountain. And your levels of resilience, you're way up the mountain of Everest than I am, right? In West, we will have our dips and sort of go down, but this is about recognising this sort of within ourselves. And, you know, and again, my one is a pathetic one, but it was the world that I was in at that particular point, right? Typically what happens is when change comes, we have lots of time to prepare for it. So this thing is going to happen, and it's going to happen, you know, in a number of days, in a number of weeks. And, right? So the problem is then our thinking gets in the way. But the reason why most people sort of surprise themselves about how resilient and adaptable they were back then was because there was no time to think. We needed to do and make mistakes, but then rectify those mistakes and crack on. So if someone, like I said, mine is pathetic, but if someone would have said to me in December 2019, right, Darryl, we're going to change the way you deliver your training sessions. This is not going to kick until April next year. So, you know, you've got 4 months to get your head around it. But what you're going to do is rather than travel up and down the country, you are going to deliver your training sessions by standing up in your lounge with your laptop on top of a cardboard box on the dining board. Right? You are going to stare at a webcam and possibly see no one's face for maybe 2 years. If my brain would have had 4 months to think about that, my brain would have dragged me kicking and screaming for those 4 months and coming up with all the reasons in the world why it was impossible. It was a catastrophe. It was never going to happen. In April 2020, I needed to make it happen, right? Or it's about finding another job, and I sort of quite like my job, so I didn't really particularly want to be doing that. So typically, it's our thinking that gets in the way. But for yourselves, right? And I know I feel like I'm lecturing at you, and I promise I'm not, right? You are continually used to change. You are continually showing signs of resilience and adaptability all the time, more than most other people, certainly more than me. We need to tell ourselves, else, as far as our brains go, it's like it never happens, right? And it's happening all the time. So this is all about a journey we go on, right? And so there are many journeys we are aware of. You make conscious plans to do things, but the one journey that we don't think about enough, if at all, day in, day out, is the journey that is all to do with what goes on between our ears and everything. And I'm still getting, right, after a couple of years of not seeing it that large on the screen, I'm still getting used to it. That is a bit freaky, isn't it? But that's our default. Once we pop into the world, once we get over the whole crying thing, once we start becoming more consciously aware of the world around us, the world's a fantastic place. We find joy in the simplest of stuff. We have a tiny little brain, but we have loads of happy moments whizzing around that. You know, and in terms of confidence, self-belief, resilience, that is it. There's nothing you can't do. I mean, let's be honest, you've got too much confidence at that age. You are a danger to yourself, right? But that, in terms of thinking, though, we begin, that face says to me, you know what, in my life, I'm going on an adventure and nothing and no one is going to get in my way. But then we get a bit older and stuff starts happening, right? And then all too soon we find ourselves having less moments feeling like this and many more moments This is you can't be told to be happy, right? That is not how happiness works. Even if you're flogged on a happy train, it doesn't mean you're going to crack a smile. But we sort of get older, and then what our thinking generally sort of tends to drift, and we have sort of more moments feeling like this, or remember more moments feeling like this, sort of moments like that. And I used to say a decade ago, and then way before that now, the average week for far too many people in terms of their brains, in terms of thinking, is their brains dishing out confetti after confetti, negative thinking. And there's a really powerful reason for that. And it's called evolution. So we've got our ancestors to thank, because actually hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of years ago, in the world they lived in back then, where there were scary things outside your front door every second of every day that could kill you, it was really important every second of every day to have that going on, to be looking over your shoulder, to be cautious, to be wary, to be pessimistic, to be essentially negative about the world you lived in. So negativity as a thinking thing was really important back then. It was fundamentally the difference between life and death. It was our, over-optimistic ancestors, the ones who were too happy. They were the silly ones that decided to randomly explore a cave for a bit of fun, never seen again. They were the ones that decided to try and make a pet of the saber-toothed tiger rather than leg it and run a mile. So very quickly, the handful who were optimistic, not dead, wiped out, gone. Right? We were left with the negative, cautious ones, and that is our legacy. So while since then, clearly, there are parts of our brain that have been bolted on, there is still one fundamental part of our brain. It is the quickest part of our brain, which is still stuck there hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of years ago. It still thinks its core purpose for you day in, day out is to keep you safe, keep you alive, keep you looking over your shoulder. Now, clearly, there are far too many people in this world of ours where that still is a day-to-day existence. But certainly for us in our normal day in, day out lives, what this part of our brain does is hold us back. So we're hardwired to see the negative stuff, the rustle in the bushes, the problems rather than the solution, the barriers as to why I can't deliver a training session with my laptop on an ironing board. But our brains love dishing out all that sort of stuff. So our thinking is a habit, right? And we've got that evolutionary negative habit, unfortunately, that's sort of gone along with us. But what we do know about habits is we can change habits. Change habits, you just sort of nudge and have to consciously do things a little bit differently to form different unconscious habits. And the same thing applies to our thinking. If you're not scared to death at the end of this session, there are some books out there you can sort of explore what we do. I'm not a big salesperson because I will highlight one book though, second in from the top left up there, only because a proud moment of my life coming up to 9 years ago now, one of my lifetime goals achieved, I became an author for the first time. Bless our publisher for agreeing to publish a self-help book for teenagers. I mean, no teenager has ever bought it. It's been on the shelf. Hands up if you've got a teenager. First two hands I saw. Well, it's all right, it's not a magic one. Right. If I can't flog them, I might as well give them away. Bold title. Please bear this in mind. This is common sense, but not common practice. There is science behind all of this sort of stuff. In fact, specifically, there's a whole PhD behind this. I will confess I didn't do the PhD. I am a simple lad from Swindon, but a guy I mentioned called Andy, who's born, bred, lives in Derby, went on what ended up being a 12-year journey with the Uni of Loughborough. So it was all done all around here. And at the end of this sort of PhD, realised it was science, but science was leading on. So the journey begins with energy. You know this. Common sense says when you've got a day when you've got decent energy levels, we crack on. Right? We get stuff done. We're productive, but more importantly, from a well-being perspective, in terms of dealing with the world, we're in a decent place, right? Regardless of how crazy the world is going on around. But on those moments, on those days where our natural energy is sort of being sapped for whatever reason, those same chores and tasks, we procrastinate, we can do all that negative fatigue starts flying out, and then more importantly to get productivity, but our well-being has gone out the window. So energy and well-being totally interlinked. So much so the University of Bristol a number of years ago now, and I've brought this back based on the 2.5 years that we've all been through, and certainly yourselves, feels more pertinent than ever. The University of Bristol carried out a big research study across 17,000 working adults, try and grab a bit of a snapshot, a moment in time. Where are we pitching in average energy levels? And I won't bore you with all the details of the research, but I'll give you the result. and the result was published on a scale of 0 to 10. So the researchers broke the energy in the workplace sort of scale down to a 0 to a 10 in terms of how we judge ourselves. So if we really simplify it, if we say 0 is this side of the room, so 0 in the workplace, energy-wise, essentially pitching in just above dead, barely above. So nothing happens at a 0. That's one extreme. Excuse me. And if we go over to this side of the room, if this is the other extreme of 10, now, evolution or not, there were some that slipped through the net because there are still some people in this world who are too happy. So we're not talking about being too happy. I mean, these people are lovely. They bounce around with endless energy, but let's be honest, they live in a parallel universe. Right? After too much time with someone who's too happy, physical violence starts coming to mind. So we're not talking about being too happy, but forget productivity in all aspects of our lives for our own sakes. Better to sort of be up here with our sort of natural energy levels more often than down there. So quick little exercise for you, just for 30 seconds. On an average week, if there is such a thing anymore, but of course we will have our peaks and our troughs. Energy goes all over the place. But gut feeling, go with your gut, not your head. Right? On an average week, on that scale of 0 to 10, what number are you on average? Where's your base level? Where do you sort of like? But it gives you a rough idea, roughly where you think you are. But across 17,000 working adults, this moment, this snapshot in time, the number that came out on average, right, this is years ago, before COVID, right, was at 3. This snapshot, this moment in time. And admittedly, the research was done in the month of January, which didn't help, right? But come on, I know that was skewed it slightly, right? But come on, I know January is the rubbish month of the year, but there's another one coming in a few months. And it's the 12th of our lives every year, but essentially people's perceptions of their energy levels for a whole sort of 31 days, with essentially sort of just dragging themselves in, pitching above death, right? And I'm sort of, and I'm a realist, right? And I try and be as optimistic as I can, even in these times, right? The best you can try and find it. But the pessimistic side of me did come out when I read that research, because I did remember that 3, even on January, on average, that is low. But then I remembered I used to be one of those people for a significant period of time in my life. And the one downside I had about my job when I was continually travelling, and it didn't matter what month of the year it was, it just got worse year upon year upon year, is that I did seem to see plenty of people who were spending too much time on an average week towards the bottom half, where 1 foot at 5 appears to be a grade. And that's not good. So where the PhD journey began, were essentially tapping into the people that seem to find energy levels more often than not up here at the 7. So the norms are around here. So pretty simple questions, really. Who are these people? What are they doing? And what can we learn from them? And that was the start of the sort of journey. Before we sort of tap into that, right, happy t-shirt aside, I absolutely accept, and I'm no secret millionaire, I absolutely accept there are plenty of pressures and challenges and stress, and the way the world is feels like it's sending us continually down here, because there were lots of external things that are continually down here, and now we've got a cost of living crisis, right? And I'm not believing that is the world that we are all living in, right? I can't believe I'm saying that in this country in the year that we're in, but nevertheless, that is it. So there individually we have lots of pressures and stresses, but collectively, right, for a number of years, there have been 2 things that we've all had, that we all share in common in all different workplaces, and some experience it more than others, that feel like they're stopping ourselves being at our best, they're sort of zapping our energy. And one of them is an external thing, but now that is internalised. And the other one has been an internal thing, essentially, since we were sort of growing up. We're going to explore sort of both of them. Because actually, one of the biggest factors for most people in terms of feeling as though they haven't got the natural energy levels they'd like on a more regular basis is the fact that actually psychologically now, and I used to joke about this 10 years ago, but it's not fun anymore, our brains are psychologically struggling to cope with the whole concept of being way too busy. Who's not busy? Who's busier than 3-4 years ago? Yeah. And I don't upset anyone. I haven't got a magic wand to get rid of it. If I was to bump into you in a couple of years' time, I bet you've been even busier. However that manifests itself. I can't get rid of that, right? That is the world that we sort of live in. But what we do know is this: when you've got your energy levels at 7 and 8, business is you just cracking on, right? That's you making a difference in your community by you telling yourself, I just crack on. Right, okay. And of course, when we're down here at the 2s and 3s, clearly psychologically we sort of feel a bit sort of more zapped, because we will be, right? And then of course then that feels like it's sort of mammoth continually getting on top of us, and of course it does. So we know we can sort of deal with it a bit differently. And this is where a piece of research comes in. That this piece of research, I promise, is not as dated as it initially looks, right? Okay. I mean, that's a classic game, you know, state of the art when I was growing up. But this research around Tetris was only done, it's just over a handful of years ago. And this relates to business. And this was done over at Harvard in America. And essentially, these researchers paid a group of Harvard students, so young, relatively bright, academic people, paid a whole group of them to play hours and hours of Tetris over a week. So these young people were just being told, are being paid to play Tetris. The researchers weren't interested in Tetris week. What they were interested in is what happened afterwards. And 1 week after playing Tetris, every single student, so not played it for a week, but 1 week after, every single student that took part in that research still said every time they closed their eyes, they would see Tetris blocks, silhouettes of sort of Tetris blocks moving around. A few people reported now and again they walk past a brick building and those bricks would start to go, right? They're essentially hallucinating. One student, 2 weeks after, and when you're young, 2 weeks is like ancient history. So he probably forgot he played Tetris for a week, but his brain had because he walked past went into a supermarket, went past where the cereal boxes were. And the cereal boxes were. And the point of that research was to highlight how long it took their brains to unconsciously process the barrage of Tetris they put it through for a week. And business is our Tetris, but you don't get the luxury of playing it for 1 week. You think you've got it the week after the week after the week after the week after. Right? So our brains have to process this stuff that we're putting it through, and the only way it can do that is when our brains are sort of switching off fundamentally. So our challenge, if we can, because what's happened is it's an external thing. Business has been driven externally, and I know there's plenty of that stuff from work, right? In our personal lives, kids, all that sort of stuff. There's plenty of blocks we've got to play, but over the years, what's happened is we've trained our brains to be busy. So our brains think being busy is normal. So our brains are helping us find Tetris blocks to play in a moment that we don't need to play anymore. So it's just much easier for us to keep doing and doing and doing and doing and doing and doing and not stopping, which is why people aren't. Some people aren't speaking properly anymore. You know, the statistics around them. So so it's about trying to help ourselves unplay this as best we can in the real world. Just do this show of hands. I'm not going to pick on anyone, but just so I get a rough proportion of people. Who still daydreams? Right, okay, that's more than most, right? Okay, give or take, just under half, right? That's typically more than what you'd normally get. Daydreamers, tell me, when you're daydreaming, what aren't you thinking about? Stage one of daydreaming is we are thinking about nothing. It is a normal human condition for us to do and think nothing. It just doesn't feel like that anymore because it feels like we should be doing something continually all the time. Here's a question, rhetorical question for yourself. If you do find yourself lucky enough to have sort of like half an hour to chill out and relax, right, and do nothing, who feels guilty? Who feels uncomfortable? Fidgety, right? Should be doing something, right? You are allowed to chill out for half an hour, right? Right, and it's really important you do. I did some sessions for a group of midwives around Scunthorpe Way back July time, and one of the midwives was saying she'd been working continuously for about 2 weeks, and she finally the day off before the session she come to, she'd had a day off, and it was relatively sort of like nice day weather-wise. So she said, you know what? She thought to myself, right, I deserved it. I bought a book about a month ago. I've not had a chance to read it, so I'm going to sit out in my little back garden and just finally get to read my book. I went, good for you, fantastic. Said, how did it go? She was, nightmare. Why, what happened? She went, well, I started reading my book. I went, yeah. She went, well, it just wasn't going in. I kept having to reread the first paragraph. And I said, well, why do you have to keep reading the first paragraph? You couldn't have been concentrating. She said, no, I wasn't concentrating. I said, so what was your brain telling you? Well, I've got ironing to do, got to put the shopping list together, got to get a present for so-and-so, then I've got to make sure I'm ready for the kids to pick up. I said, right, okay. So fair enough. So that stuff has to be done at some point. I get that. Fantastic. So anyway, how was the book? She went, gave up after 2 minutes, went in and cracked on with the ironing. Right? And that's sort of the point. It's just easier for us to do that than do nothing. And I won't do it with you because of time, but back in May, it was the first sort of conference I've done like this in over 2 years. There's about 200 people in this room, and I asked any question, who daydream, and about 30, 40 people put their hands up in the air, which is sort of typically what I normally expect. You guys are slightly high. And so I said, well, you know what, it's just a lost behaviour, because we did it as kids. I mean, I definitely know I did it. I can't remember daydreaming as a kid, but I remember being told off by the teacher for staring out the window, so I definitely know I did it, right? But it's just a lost skill. And I know we've all learned mindfulness now, and some of you wouldn't be know more than I about it. And you know, some people practice it. And, you know, it's been around for thousands of years. We're finally grabbing it in Western society to try and help our brains cope with that. But in its strictest definition, daydreaming is a mindfulness, but it's right up there. And so I said in this room full of people, because I had a bit longer than I did with you, and we had a window like that, but there was a bit of greenery outside. So I said, you know what, let's not talk about it, let's do it. Your daydreaming journey begins now. We're going to do absolutely nothing now, apart from just stare out a window for 2 minutes. Second I said the word stare, daydreamers, you've gone away with the fairies. That's training session. For the majority of people, this is the bit that I love the most. I missed the bit that I missed for 2 years. Sheepish of it, really. You know, because I look around the room and the majority of people go into what can only be described as a blind panic. It's like they're asking to run a marathon. It's like, what do you mean look at them? Really? Oh, this is just right. This is just right. Okay, well, any clown can look out a window. So they look in the direction of the window, but they're not switching off. They're not daydreaming. And there's always a few people who are sat closest to the window who can't see anyone anymore. Who you know on the inside are going, is this a wind up? Am I the only one doing this? Right, is everyone laughing behind my back? Is there something I don't know? So you'll always see a couple of heads that just go, oh no, we're actually doing this. This is actually happening. And then give it 30 seconds max, especially with set up like tabletops on tables. There was a whole load of people at the back of the room that think I couldn't see what they were doing, but I knew exactly what they were doing. You just saw them look in the direction of the window, and they slowly leant back in their chair. They pulled out their mobile phone, it's under the tablecloth, so I couldn't see, and they're looking up, then they're glancing down, they're doing something. I mean, they're physically breaking their back, but at least they're doing something. And essentially what they're telling themselves in that moment is for their well-being, rather than stop and stare out a window and psychologically recharge my batteries ready to go for that again, which is what we are doing. I know what would be a much better use of my time. I'd just jump onto Facebook again and find out what a whole bunch of people I don't care about are. I'm not saying don't go onto Facebook or do what we do on our phones. I'm not saying go back to carrier pigeons for communication. And now I'm back on the road a bit more. I'm sort of grateful I got this in case I break down. But the reality is, this has been a big, massive driver of that. Right, and research came out of Birmingham 3 and a bit years ago. I've not seen it updated. It probably wasn't because of COVID, but it researched the amount of interactions we have with our mobile devices on average per day. And obviously, clearly, some people need to use their phone for work purposes more than others. So that's statistically standardized and all that sort of stuff. So it's just like an average of how often we interact with this thing. So pick it up, that's one. Touch the screen, that's another. Count them up. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 2,500 times a day. On average, doing stuff. Now, I know within that 2,500 times a day you are aware of using this thing, but for most people, for most of the time, when we do find ourselves with 30 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes, rather than stop and stare out a window and let our brains drift off, it's just much easier to pick this thing up and have another turn at Tetris. I might as well sort of do that. And I try not to get frustrated, because I was guilty as anyone. I'm not, you know, so with these things, but, you know, I try and manage it as best I can. And I go on Twitter now and again for that. I've tweeted and stuff, but if you follow me, nothing really happens. Right? Okay, I don't really do social media, right? I do Twitter now and again when it's at a lovely conference like this. Right? So, but you know, I try not to get frustrated with people's behaviours now, but I'm really struggling to sort of like not boil over in terms of people checking the weather. Oh, come on. Rather than trust your own eyes and look out a window. Oh, it's got my weather app. You can't just tell me what's going on out there in the world, right? It's not right anyway, is it? But it's sort of easier to do that, right? So these things have sort of been a big driver. So our challenge is to sort of try and remove some of this stuff. And of course, when we remove some of this stuff, we have a bit more capacity in our brain to think a bit differently and to maybe let things in. And certainly if we daydream long enough, nice stuff starts happening, right? Nice memories come back. So, you know, we start sort of realising maybe the world's not as bad as we possibly think it is when we're bogged down doing all that sort of stuff. And so what we can do, right, a little bit more often, right, but we have to sort of consciously give our brains a nudge to start going to this window, because our brains don't do it normally anyway, is to spend a bit more time there. Now, I know that is a perfect image in terms of, you know, organisations and stuff and everything. You know, when everything goes well, you lot never know, right? When the smallest thing goes wrong, right? That's everyone there. But we're sort of doing this in our heads, right? And if we think about it, right, and this is why it's human beings, and we are so wired to negativity. You think about this, and maybe this is not quite your experience, but I certainly know, speaking to those midwives and the other sort of sessions I've done with people in NHS, let's be honest, right? Cliff edge moment for all of us, COVID, everyone worried about sort of like essentially not dying, right, which is fundamentally the purpose. And in 2020, then that was that big, massive collective thing of gratitude, wasn't it? Thursday nights clap. I know it wasn't going to last forever. The rainbow, in fact, I saw a rainbow on a lorry today. So I'm sort of like, sort of driving this, still see a few around. I'm sort of on my travels, right? So everyone in 2020, or a lot of people, right, in terms of you lot, they were there, right? And they were there big time, right? They were carrying you, right, metaphorically on their shoulders, right? They would have done anything, right? Where are they now? It's not gone anywhere. It's still here, right? But how quickly, oh, we've just gravitated to the fact that I can't get this when I want it, I can't do this, and I can't do that, unaware of all the pressure that's resting during because that's not important. I'm just going to spend more time in the complaints window because our brains love that. Our brains love spending all the time there. Our brains very rarely, certainly not naturally, spend time, certainly in the society, this society, right? Different cultures, right? Spend enough time there. So then, I'll just spend a little bit of time there now. Simple question, just for a few minutes, have a chat. What are you grateful for? Right? What are you grateful for? But possibly maybe take for granted, certainly when we get bogged down. So what are the things in life we are grateful for? Go, away you go. And again, it's like the happiness thing, not being told to be happy, not be told to be grateful. But we've got to come from within. Right, and again, this isn't about delusion, right? This is about sort of balance in the world. Yes, there's plenty of things that sort of like are injustice that's sort of like going on sort of around us all the time. But this is just about using strategies to help us deal with the Tetris fuel world that we're sort of continually dealing with. And there's hundreds of pieces of research to highlight how powerful gratitude is for our resilience and well-being. We just don't spend enough time sort of window. You know, I mean, I was told as a kid all the time to be grateful. Right, I come home from school, I go out play footy with my mates, then it'd be dinner time, get called in, I sit at the table, I'm starving, then a disaster. There are Brussels sprouts on my plate. Oh my God, why have we got sprouts? It's summer. I don't even eat Christmas, let alone in June, right? I'm not eating. Well, Daryl, just be grateful. You've got some food on the table. There are some children in this world that don't eat as well as you. It's like, well, fine, send them my sprouts. Right? I can be aware of that, but I'm not living it, right? I can feel sorry for people that don't sort of have the meal that I have, but if you're not living it, you're not living it, are you? And gratitude's massive. I'm mixing my metaphors because we know I'm going to turn it into a toolbox, but it's like a well-being toolbox, right? That we carry around with us. We just have to consciously tap into it a little bit more because our brains naturally don't sort of look into it. So reminding yourself of how resilient you are rather than just being is you looking in the toolbox. Practicing gratitude, however we practice that on a regular basis, is you tapping into the toolbox and your brain getting the message that actually that thing's sort of important things for us in terms of sort of getting through things. And again, you know, I guess, I mean, shout out a few that you talked about, just shout a few out. Family, yeah, that always comes up. Like even prior to COVID was sort of, you know, family would always be right up there. Family, friends, I would also argue, especially for you lot, colleagues. You lot are like extended family, aren't you? Right, I know you might work remotely and stuff and everything else and might not get to meet up like this sort of like as often as you like, but do not take that for granted, right? You don't need research to back this up, but having close relationships at work is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, motivational psychological factor for people to rock up every day, knowing you've got a bucket load of Tetris and more coming your way. You sort of at least know you've got people around you that can sort of support you and help you out, just ask how you are. So our relationships, I'm sure you talk about health and our relative health, right? There's lots of stuff. And again, I'm going to guess, but I reckon everything you talked about fell under a particular area of well-being. So in academia, they broke well-being into two forms in terms of how we can experience it. So there's what's called hedonic well-being, which is hedonism, instant gratification, pursuit of pleasure stuff. And there's what they call eudaimonic well-being, which derives from Latin, which means the meaningful stuff. And it will be unsurprising for you to know that it's the meaningful stuff that has a longer term well-being benefit to us than the hedonic stuff. So hedonic well-being is not bad, right? We need to treat ourselves, a bit of retail therapy and all that sort of stuff now and again, right? But what's been happening over the years is for most people, we've seen it across the whole sort of society, and stats will back this up, as we've been getting busier and busier and busier and busier, people have been spending less time, less quality time, less thinking time around the meaningful stuff, the free stuff, people experiences, all that sort of stuff, the outdoors. And so what we're doing in terms of our well-being is just getting more and more through the hedonic stuff. So it doesn't have to be expensive, but it's just purchase after purchase after purchase after purchase. So again, it's just about trying to find sort of that balance. So busyness, right? It's there, it's relentless, it's never stopping. The problem is our brains like keeping us busy. Right, so our brains think you're running around like a headless chicken is normal, right? So hence you're not allowed to sit down in peace and quiet from yourself, right? And there's a lovely book actually. I'd recommend it. I would. It's called The Untethered Soul, and I can't remember who the name. I'm terrible with names, but it's a really lovely book. So if you've got a little inner voice that's continually, I mean, all of our voices are negative, thanks to our wiring and stuff. But actually, if your one is really sort of like holding you back, it's a really lovely book called The Untethered Soul. It just sort of like talks about strategies about how to try and sort of maintain it. Because the reality is, and it's an American book, so it talks about roommate in terms of friend. But if you had a close friend that was giving you this advice relentlessly every second of every day, right, they would be your friend for much longer. Right, so you know, and it's just the concept of you are detached from your voice. It's not you because you're listening to it, you're hearing it, so you're like an observer to this thing going on. So, but yeah, if you've got one of those voices, then it's not one of our books. Really interesting going through. So business is there. There's another thing that prevents us from sort of being as best as feeling as good as we can, as often as we possibly can in the real world with the challenges we face. And it is an internal thing. And in psychology, Robert Holden calls this destination addiction. And destination addiction suggests we're continually telling ourselves, at some point in the future, I'll be happy or happier. So happiness as a thing is always a moment over there. Now, I'm not saying not allowed to look forward to stuff. Right? If you're a person in life who pitches in at a 7 and 8, more often than not, and you book a summer holiday or you've got a weekend planned or something, you're allowed to look forward to that because that's absolutely fine because you're up here. But down here, at this end, and certainly to me, when I was that version of me down there and I was there for a good pretty much 2 years, destination addiction is about survival. It's about getting through a period of time. So for far too many Mondays, and I care to remember, my alarm would go off, and the first thing I would tell myself on a Monday morning would be, if I can just get to Friday, I will be happy. So I would wish away a week, wait for this day called Friday, which wasn't that magic. It just had a bit more energy about myself because I had a couple of days off work coming, and all of a sudden, well, in fairness, I didn't enjoy Sunday because I was thinking of Monday. Then Monday would come round, and I'm wishing for Friday, and no one in this world, no one of any age has got enough weeks in life to wish them away week after week after week. Subsequently found out the average lifespan in this country is just short of 4,000 weeks. Not quite as high a number as I've hoped for because I wasted plenty, but I'm not going to waste any more. But the problem with destination addiction is this. Regardless of where we are energy-wise, while we're telling ourselves the message that happiness is over there in the future, our brains process that as, so right now in this moment, I can't be. So our brains are not primed to look, again, like at the gratitude window or to look at the little sort of successes we're having. And, you know, I'm not saying every day is awesome. Of course it's not. Every day is not the Lego movie. Every day is just like every other day. But there are little things that are happening day in, day out that our brains are deleting. They're getting rid of. It's a spam filter. They're sort of like they're totally detaching ourselves from it. And Sean Akel talks about the happiness rainbow, and it's sort of sold to us. And this has been through education and work for a number of years now. The model worked for a number of years, but it's broken. We're really told implicitly from a really young age through education, work hard, be successful, then you can be happy. So happiness is an emotional pot of gold over here. But to get there, you've got to put some effort in, which is fair enough. We've all got to work hard, right? Then achieve stuff, then you can be happy. Well, there's something broken in that model because 11 years of doing this, I've met thousands upon thousands of people who are working hard all the time. By default, that means I'm meeting thousands and thousands of people who are achieving stuff all the time, but I'm not meeting thousands and thousands of happy people, right? And it's sort of, this thing sort of came back to life for me because my youngest did his GCSEs this year, and he went in on results day. Obviously, he went into the school. I'm sat there in the car with my wife, dead nervous about what's going to happen. He sort of came out of the school, and you sort of see from his face, he was all right. He was all right. And in fact, he did prepare. He thought he was going to do so. He was going to stay on and do his BTECs and stuff and everything. And I just remember then sort of he was talking about it, had this big beaming smile, and I just remember thinking, oh yeah, he thinks he's going to be happy forever now. Work hard. Get your GCSEs, then you can be happy, right? Yeah. How do I break this to you? I'm going to let you have the day, right? But then, unfortunately, there's a bigger pot of gold over there. So forget the last 16 years. But go get your BTECs, work hard like you've never worked before. But go get your BTECs, and then I can be happy forever, Dad. Yes, of course you can. So I'll be having the same conversation in 2 years' time. Now you need a job, then you need a better job, and then you need a promotion, and then when I retire. I hope we'll have a lovely retirement when that time comes, but we're bloody working really hard for it. So what Sean Akel talks about is the fact that we're already at the right end of the rainbow. There's a little emotional pot of gold of happiness is right there, right? It doesn't have to be euphoric, right? But there's little things that are happening day in, day out that we're just not even seeing because we're looking in the wrong direction. So it's about trying to help our brain see the journey rather than the end point. So we're going quite philosophical now. We're going deep quite early, right? So don't go to Wikipedia to find the answer out because this is something sort of personal for you. But just for a couple of minutes, just start contemplating because it's a big question for you to answer in literally 2 minutes. But what is that? All right? What is that for you? How does it manifest itself? What does it mean, Dave? If we're looking at the right end of the rainbow, right? What is that? What is that? Here you go. Whether it's about being with people, certain environments, we sort of feel like and pressing our heads at that particular point. And like I said at the beginning, well, you choose to be happy. It's an emotion. You've got happy on doesn't mean to say you're going to have a great day. You know what that is for you. At least you might just be able to create those environments just that little bit more to help our brain start looking in the right direction a little bit rather than sort of over there. So it doesn't have to be for very long, but it could just be, we all do it. Well, most people do a to-do list and stuff, trying to preempt the Tetris that's going to come, and obviously will come. Maybe on our to-do list every day. We just need to make sure right at the top of our to-do list, we just put down whatever that is for us to make sure we prioritize it a little bit more and make sure we find a moment anyway where we step out of Tetris and experience whatever that happens to be. This negative bias we've got, thanks to our ancestors, not that it was their fault, because that was the world they sort of lived in, right? Actually has a number in psychology, and essentially it's a ratio. It's called the Lasada line. It's a ratio essentially of positive to negative for our personal well-being. And because it's an academic piece of work, this number has to be to 4 decimal places for some strange reason. So it's 2.9013 to 1. In the real world, anyone remember De La Soul? 3 is the magic number, right? Okay. So for our personal well-being, we have to remind ourselves, feel or experience 3 positives to every negative. So that's how sort of strong negativity is in terms of our thinking. And there's also an argument that number's even higher now because that research is a few years old. But essentially, in terms of negativity, it is at least 3 times more powerful than positivity in terms of what we're sort of laying down in our brains. So we've got to sort of work really hard to sort of help overcome this sort of thing. It doesn't just happen sort of like by accident. And I will come on to the PhD in a second. I will say for the record, I know this sounds very defeatist for this section, but I am never, ever going to do a PhD. I was born in Swindon. That didn't quite define me. But in the 90s, I left and I went to Liverpool to do biochemistry. So I got a biochemistry degree. So I was a biochemist for a bit. Left that world, did something else. We didn't do this now. But back in 2013, I went back to academia to study my master's in this field of psychology down in London. Lovely course. I met some lovely people. I'm going to be honest though, for my brain, after 14 years, going back to academia. Oh, come on. Academic writing and referencing and the way you got. I'm reading really long, horrible, complicated journals about how everyone's supposed to be happy. And I ended up doing my research project in 2015, and I worked with a whole load of primary school kids. And I loved working with them. They were brilliant. I did not enjoy writing it all up and doing my stats and all that business, right? But I got it over the line, and that was it. I handed it in. And as far as I was concerned, that was the last ever academic piece of work I was ever going to do in the rest of my life. I remember vividly waking up the very next morning thinking, you know something? I think I'm much happier now finished studying academics. Missed school for 2 years, right? So I'm not going to study it for another 7 to get a doctorate. I'm not that interested. So don't study it unless you're that way inclined, right? But just try and live and breathe it. But I met this. I read this journal in my first couple of months, and it was beautiful. And what was really nice was one sentence. And in this sentence, there was no complicated words, but it very simply spelt out how you need to think about your brain. And I know I'm throwing a load of stuff at you, and that's intentional, like I mentioned. And obviously, they've got the slides here anyway that they can distribute as a reminder. But if you just take this one thing away and hold on to it for as long as you can, just take this one sentence away. All it said was, your brain is just like a young child that never grows up. So if we take that as a premise, then no matter how old we get, this thing between our ears remains like a young child that never grows up. The logical next question we have to ask ourselves is, so how much care, effort, attention and nurturing do we put into it on a day-to-day basis? The reality is, it's the life and for the things we've just been doing the bare minimum, if any. And you don't need to be a parent to know this, but when a young person comes into your life for the first time, what is it that you wish for them? I want you to know, right? I want you to grow up and be happy and healthy, and clearly we have a certain level of control over that. I don't think I've ever met a parent who held their firstborn in their arms and went, you know something, you better end up being great at trigonometry when you get to secondary school. It's going to be absolutely pointless, right? We're not bothered. Like, they don't become bothered when they don't do their trigonometry homework for some reason, right? But we're sort of, but that's all we really want. And I think for yourself, right? And I know for yourself, it will involve children, but if you just think about the analogy of looking after people, right? You have committed a career, blood, sweat, tears, right? The big number 5s that you went through and will continually go through, all the Tetris that you go through, right? So you've committed careers, blood, sweat, and tears in terms of improving the lives of people in your community. I know maybe I'm over romanticizing it, right? But that's from my perspective, that's what you do, right? Okay. I guess my question is, how much blood, sweat, and tears do you put into you? That would just be my question, especially on those moments where you have stepped off from that treadmill. One of the midwives said about like a uniform, she says he sort of sees it like a shield. So that shield goes on, her face goes on, and that's it, and she's in it. And it's brilliant, it's amazing, because I don't have the resilience to be able to do that. You get knocked around the face and knocked here and knocked there and everywhere. But even more reason when, metaphorically or not, the uniform comes off, right, we start making sure we look after ourselves more probably than you not probably do, even though I know some people in this room probably are in the mental health sector, and I understand that. Probably marking my homework, which is absolutely fair enough. But I guess the question is, how often do you look after you, right? Again, this is all about neurology, and we're all aware of neurology. Been around for many years. Well, in fact, when I was growing up, there was still a belief that in terms of our thinking, you evolve until about the age of 12, and then that's it. Your mindset is fixed. You're set in stone. This is how we think for the rest of our lives. That's not true. We have neuroplasticity. Our brain is continually evolving and shaping. It can't not. It's just about the level of control we put into that shape. And I met this professor who was brilliant because he simplified everything. And he used to describe neurology like footprints in the snow. And all he said is, we're continually putting footprints down. And every thought we have is a footprint. But because we've got this negative bias from a really young age, all those footprints get put down without us even realising it. We're soaking this stuff up unconsciously. So not that it works like this in your brain, but if one half of your brain is positive and one's negative, the negative side is there. It's overdeveloped, it's charged, it's continually building. What we don't have enough stuff on, if you like, is the footprints on the other side. So all these exercises we're going through, as boring and as simple as they are, work because they're footprints. So you stopping and reminding yourself of how resilient you are, the examples, and there are plenty of them, is you putting footprint down. You just doing it and moving on is not a footprint. Gratitude, the more you go to that window or look in the toolbox, whichever metaphor you want, right, the more that gets bedded down. And here's another one for you. Now go with this. You're very humble people, so you'll find this uncomfortable, but this research is called Your Best Possible Self. And it highlighted people who regularly remind themselves of who they are at their best, improve their well-being, improve their resilience. And they also reported pitching in at their best more than they thought they'd done previously. The argument actually was that they weren't doing it anymore. They suddenly were realising they were doing it. So for the purposes of time, you are many, 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 many more than 3, which is very quickly for a couple of minutes, talk through 3 words that describe you at your best. Just 3 of them. Who are you at your best? If you've been thinking about coming up with some words, I think I've got a big head. Right, so that's not the case. That's not what research is about. This research taps into that concept of you get what you focus on. The more you think about yourself in this particular way, the more you will see evidence around you to prove you are doing it. Right? You're not deluding yourself, you are actually doing it. And I genuinely mean this, unless we're having a bad day, everybody pitches in at their best more than they pitch in at their worst. But thanks to this negative bias, we've got one of the things that we sort of ruminate on at the end of the day. Those things that didn't go quite to plan, right? And that's fine, because things don't go to plan. And I'm sure if you make a mistake, you rectify your mistake, because that's what you do. But you don't remember you rectify the mistake you make. You just remember the mistake you made in the first place. And so everybody pitches at their best, more than they pitch at their worst. So it's just about balance. And again, it's you're more than 3 words. And it's not about doing don't do this with a megaphone outside your house every day. But this is just telling your brain a different thing. This is you telling your brain that you at your best is as important, if not more important, than you at your worst. So we start to sort of see evidence around us. And the reason why people said in that research that quite quickly they said they reported pitching in at their best more than they'd done before, the initial argument was they weren't doing it anymore. they were just magically suddenly seeing it happen. Right? Because it's happening anyway. So why would we want to actually make sure we look in that mirror and sort of seeing it amongst ourselves? And this also applies, by the way, to overlaid on goal setting. So this is the research that I did with primary school kids. I did it with a whole bunch of kids that qualified for pupil premium, and what they called the concepts in this field of psychology called hope theory. So hope theory is not about keeping your fingers crossed, but the argument is it's a much better level than just being optimistic. So what you do is, when you set a goal for yourself, and don't just set a goal for the sake of setting a goal, that's pointless. But once you sort of set a goal for yourself, right, first thing we do is we put steps along the way to get there. Right, certainly the first steps, and who knows where that's going to take us. But actually, what happens is, guess what? Stuff goes wrong. So we might be optimistic. I might be optimistic about being an astronaut, right? I'm 49, but I'm still going to go for it, right? So what do I need to do to be an astronaut? Right. Well, I probably need to get a bit fitter. So I'll buy some trainers, right? I might start running, but then say I start running and I pick up a bit of an injury, right? Then it's like, oh, right, well, yeah, that's gone. That's me out for a few months, and I'm not going to earn enough money to give it to Elon Musk to send me to space. So that's it. I'm giving up. What they talk about in terms of hope theory is what you do is people who are high in hope, when things go wrong, they just find another way of getting it. And one way of helping our brains understand that, it's a really simple thing, and it's like a trick. But alongside your what do I need to do to get there, you ask yourself the question, who do I need to be? Which essentially is you at your best. So who do I need to be to get there? Because that won't change, right? My exercise and regime might need to change because I've injured myself running, but the reality is, who do I need to be? Well, I need to be patient, I need to be focused, I need to be determined. Well, that still applies, right? It's just about, I just got to find another way of being those things. And so it's a really simple sort of thing in terms of overlaying onto goal setting. So this field of psychology, I did promise you, it's not happiness mumbo jumbo. In academic terms, it's a relative infant in the wider field of psychology. So traditional psychology has been around for about 150 years. Positive psychology began life in 1998 from a traditional psychologist, a guy over in America called Martin Seligman, who became the head of the APA and basically said to all these other sort of eminent psychologists, we're doing something wrong, we're missing a trick. And what he was saying is, why can't we apply what we do in psychology to everyone? So I know I have a bit of fun with the Uni of Bristol research on a 0 to 10 sort of scale. Clearly, we're all fully aware of this, and sort of people working in it. So there is a mental, an area of mental ill health important people fall into, and thankfully now we're talking about it, supporting every use of may that continue. My wife is a psychotherapist, so I'm fully aware of that. That is the field that she will work in with her clients and stuff. Positive psychology is not about that. Positive psychology, essentially Seligman was saying, well, why do we wait for people to fall into that area before we spring into action? Why can't we help sort of at least try and prevent it, or at least people try and flourish a little bit more in their day? So if we call this 0 to 10 scale on mental wealth, essentially we're saying, why can't we help people who are spending far too much time down at the 3s and 4s of this world, a bit like I was. So I wasn't depressed, but I sort of got myself stuck in a negative rut, and sort of like, well, that negative infection was dishing out, etc., was getting on top of me. Why can't we help their brains navigate their world a bit differently and maybe sort of start pitching in now and again at 4 or 5, so on and so forth. So after 4 years of research, in 2002, it got given its own official academic brand. And the 2 bullet points there sort of summarise the purpose of it, really, and our little role within it. It's the spread to the masses. The more we practice this, the easier it becomes. I know we know this, but our well-being and resilience is not set in stone. It's about the effort we put into it. And the thing about effort is, as human beings, we put effort into the things we prioritise. And while we do take our relationships for granted at times, we put a lot of effort into relationships. Any hobbies you've got you're passionate about, doesn't matter whether you have a rubbish week or not, you will find time to do your hobby. Well, as we're all here now, aside from our physical health, our mental health is the most important thing we have every day. So if it is, we might just decide to raise the level of importance of ourselves to ourselves. Just that. So the PhD, when Andy from Derby began this in the noughties, this was the UK's first biggest piece of research in positive psychology. So it's a proper sort of life-changing moment for Andy. Brand new possible career on the horizon. His PhD is called Flourishing in the Workplace. And if we're to boil down his 80,000 word long complicated thesis into a dead simple graph, this is it. So PhD in a graph doesn't get much simpler than this. So if this is a graph of well-being, if we're to follow you around on an average week and measure well-being levels in the many different ways it can be measured, there'll be moments where all of us hit our 5 points. So energy-wise, you feel like you're naturally up at a 7-ish. You are at your best, right? And it sort of feels relatively easy. So the world is still the world, flying around at 1,000,000 miles an hour, but you're dealing with it a bit different. We also, on an average week, will hit our low point, so we'll go down energy-wise to the sort of places down there. They might only be for 5 minutes, but down there, we're a million miles away from being ourselves at our best. So internally, we have our own inner minimum level of well-being and an inner maximum level of well-being, which is unique to you. So bearing in mind, for just short of a decade, Andy was going around lots of different workplaces across the country, essentially seeking out happy people. He didn't find very many. What he did find was far too many people were spending far too much time in their bottom third, this red zone. So that sort of ordinary version of ourselves, that sort of plodding zone, just about sort of getting through. So spending too much time down there. And what he uncovered, and we know it intuitively, is we sort of stumble up there by accident. Because nice stuff happens now and again. But if we're not careful, Tetris, busyness, the world, change, everything gets on top of us and conspire to sort of bring us back down there. But fortunately, what Andy did find was a small percentage of people, just 2% of his population, were being themselves at their best more often than not. So their norm was up there. So they have moments down there, but their norm is up there. So we call them the 2%ers. And the 2% version of you is you at your best when it feels relatively easy. And some of you will have heard of a concept in academia called flow, right? When you are just immersed in something, right? Well, you're more likely to hit those moments of flow when we spend more time pitching in up there. So the world on the outside does not change. You being that 2% version of you does not mean to say the sun shines, does not mean to say Tetris disappears magically overnight. Right? It means we deal with the world differently. And going back to that saying that the same event happens to two people, but they seem to be describing two totally separate things, well, they are, because they're in different places. And in fact, in any given specific situation, you will see and experience that situation emotionally totally differently when you're looking through the eyes up there compared to looking through your eyes when we're down there. So 2%ers are the people who are too happy. So the ones who are grounded in reality. So can do, not a problem, leave it with me. You know, that's where the best colleagues are, the best leadership is, the best parenting happens. Life doesn't go smoothly, but we deal with it a bit differently. And I know I'm in a room for me. And even if you don't think you are, I would wager, certainly in a workplace perspective, you spend much more time up there than a lot of people do. And of course, sort of well-being goes all over the shop. Of course it does. But the arrow there is the most important bit, because this is about the long-term commitment we place on ourselves. Because the difference between you in the long term, day in, day out, pitching in at the bottom of your arrow, compared to pitching in at the top of your arrow, is life-changing. It's life-changing for you in terms of dealing with the world. It's life-changing for every single relationship we have. Now, there are some people that spend all their time right at the bottom of the arrow. So it's not the whole red zone, but people who spend all their time right down at the bottom of it, right, which I used to do. I thought I could have a week called mood hoovers. We're not going to dwell on this, right, too much, because it's 2% we're interested in. You know, we all have our mood hoover moments, right? Even 2% can't be up there all the time, so we'll have our mood hoover moments. But to be completely clinically diagnosed essentially as a mood hoover, we've been there a bit too long. So the language down there is sort of the polar opposite, in a continual basis, right? That can't be done. That'll never work, but without any shifts to what might work. My favourite phrase is a mood hoover. My previous career to this, I was there for 14 years, so not exactly the longest career in the world. But I would go around to anyone in those last 2 years. I would go around to anyone that would listen and go, "Oh, you know something." It was better in the old days, wasn't it? People would nod their head and agree with me, go, "Yeah, you're right, Darryl. We had less Tetris. We seem to play that a bit more fun." So I told you, this I haven't got a clue what we're on about. It's going to be a disaster. This, you mark my words. My brain became brilliant at spotting all the reasons in the world why it was better in the old days. Echo chamber. There was a slight flaw with that strategy, though, because whether it was true or not was irrelevant. I was not in the old days. Right? I was in that day, and today I'm here, and fingers crossed health-wise I get another go tomorrow. But really all I wanted was people to agree with me that it was better in the old days, because it was another fantastic excuse to spend another day down there. It takes no effort for our brains to be down there. That's easy. Right? It takes effort to be up there, which is typically why, I mean, you lot will know more 2%ers than most people, but, you know, typically, you know, we know more mood hoovers than, and again, this isn't the depression thing, it's something on a totally different level. This is just the low level mumbling and grumbling. And, you know, the easiest thing in the world, the easiest thing for your brain is to go down your arrow into your negative zone. What's even easier is to not be aware we've slipped. So it drifts into another hour and then a day, and then you're allowed your bad day, but then it's not allowed to turn into a bad week. But that's what happened to me. And then an awful night, a fortnight, a crap month, and 18 months of my life disappeared. And there I was, claiming it was better in the old days, getting frustrated over stupid little things that never used to bother me. And I remember kidding myself a couple of times thinking, oh, I'll be all right. I'll turn up at work, I'll get a spark of life, I'll get a pay rise or a better company car or something. Well, that day never happened. What happened was 13 years ago, someone gave me a book called The Art of Being Brilliant. And it's PhD in very simple form. I read it. It made me back but more importantly, it got me to stare at this graph. It made me realise I was one of them. If I wanted my lads are 21 and 16 now, so 13 years ago, do the maths. They were much younger then. If I wanted my two lads to grow up as movie viewers, I was going the right way about it every time I walked through the door in the evening after another rubbish day at work. So I know a couple of years later, it suddenly became my job for some strange reason, and that's great. But for me, this graph totally transformed my relationship on a personal level overnight. Because when it got me to look in a mirror, it was a really horrible mirror to look into. But if I wouldn't have looked at that mirror then, I would just carried on drifting and doing what I was doing. And my lads, thankfully, they haven't got the 5'7" gene. My lads are up here, right? But they'd just be bigger mood hoover versions of me. So that graph totally transformed my relationships. Because when I realised where I was, 2, I realised I didn't want to be there anymore. 3, I realised I certainly didn't want to never sort of my lads end up in that thing. So not bad people, right? Just stuck. And it's the easiest mindset to get stuck into. Right, but our challenge is when we have a dip, and it's fine. It's fine to have a whinge and a moan. Getting stuff off your chest out loud is good for you. It is cathartic for around about 2 minutes. Anything longer than that is us just wallowing in. Our brains like to go to the complaint and stay there for as long as physically possible. So we need to then force ourselves to go on that journey. And one thing I did do, and it's one, so I won't get you through this exercise for the time, but it's a lovely one. Typically, it's a gratitude exercise traditionally. But when I came across it, and realised I was a moody, right? It's something I've been miserable for 2 years. I don't suddenly go, woohoo, right, okay, life's all right again. I still have the same job, I still have the same pressures, still have the same stresses, right? So I need strategies to snap out of it. And this one was a lovely one. And I sort of expanded it in terms of also trying to remind myself of not just what I was grateful for, but also the little successes I was having. Going to follow the model, work hard, be successful, then you can be happy. Then at least we can do is remind ourselves of what our little achievements are. And this exercise is called 3 Good Things. So maybe aware of that. Again, it's not to do every day, but 2 or 3 times a week, just stop and ask yourself the question: 3 good things happen about my day. It's just about helping our brain at the right end of the rainbow. I can tuck into that thing for sort of 10, whatever it happens to be. Pressing that sort of moment, and also reminding ourselves of our achievements. Because what's the question? And it's great to do with kids. What 3 good things happened at school is a totally different question for their brain than how was school. Because that's the question we ask each other, isn't it? Sort of at the end of the day, or whatever, end of a shift, whatever it happens to be, you go home, you see a family member, your partner, friend, whatever. What's the question we ask each other? How was your day? Right, well, thanks to our negative bias, generally the good stuff doesn't come out of it. I mean, my wife's called Sandra, the old versions of us before we do what we do now. That'll be it. Come back home from work. How was your day? She'd be straight in. Oh, don't talk to me about mine. Started the roadworks early on the A road, so I was late getting in. That's twice this week. Not good. Then this big project we were working on, it was all going blissfully, right, until Derek got involved. He fucked it up. Now it's going to be 2 months late. So I had to phone the client. I was nominated to phone the client, so they were not happy. And then the boss found out, so she gave us all the roasting before lunchtime. So by the time we got to the canteen, there was hardly any food left on the shelves. And I'm sat there just nodding my head. But I'm not really listening. I'm just waiting for my turn. Oh, you think you had a bad day? So we were having a competition every evening, so we had the worst day ever. Unfortunately, right, apart from the fact that's a sad way to spend every evening, what it did do was just reinforce the footprints in our brain that the rubbish stuff is more important than the good stuff. So 3 good things, and that's been using traditional psychology. It helps people who maybe are suffering with mental ill health and just can't see the wood for the trees. It's about just trying to find a glimmer of hope. In positive psychology, it's just a way of us sort of reminding ourselves of the little victories we're having, the little things to be grateful for, just to help us sort of keep there at the right end of the rainbow. So the ripple effect, by the way, this is what you do, and this is what you do in your community without you even knowing it. So we know negativity spreads like wildfire, but positivity also spreads, right? And it spreads in this percentage, and it's 3 degrees of separation. So if you are that upbeat, positive, what we would call 2% version of you, you meet someone, they get an uptick by 16% just because you're around. That person who gets an uptick by 16% goes to meet somebody else, and that person they meet gets a lift by 10%. And that person who gets it by 10% goes to meet somebody else who probably doesn't even know you exist in the world. And that person they meet gets a little bit of a lift by 6%. So you are dropping all those ripples out in your community by doing what you're doing, and just being who you are when you're doing what you're doing. Right? Clearly, there aren't enough people in this sort of polarized world of ours that are doing enough sort of that sort of stuff. So again, 3 good things, reminding ourselves of those things that you are doing. And if we don't, your brain will delete them and get rid of them because it's not important. So in summary, you can read that. You'll get these slides anyway, because you get a summary of all that, and they're just helping us overcome this sort of this 3-to-1 thing. And you know, maybe in your best, a bit of homework for you, because you're more than 3 words. But over the next few days, just start jotting down all the words that describe you at your best. Maybe put them in your phone, right? Because this goes everywhere, doesn't it? So, and in one of the 2,500 times today, you can interact with your phone anyway. Why not make one of them just you reminding yourself of that big, massive list that you currently are? If you're interested, you can find out more about us there. It's called the Happiness Club on the website for people who don't know what Super Centres are, but you've now been indoctrinated into what that all about is. So I genuinely thank you for your time. I know you've had a really long day sort of sat here in this room, but I really appreciate all your energy because these sessions are only good for you. It's been lovely to meet you all, and whatever you do not give up, right? Because your communities, right, your communities are immeasurably better for you rocking up and doing what you do. So thank you for doing what you do. Make sure you look at